Now we come to Genesis 6, and this is truly a set-apart chapter. Really, throughout all the Old Testament, this one really stands by itself in that it details the beginning events of a very radical time in history in which our day, the very last of the last days, are likened unto, and that is the days of Noah. Now, as one can clearly see from this age chart, Adam to Joseph, how in Genesis 1, you see Adam, and then 1,656 years later, we come to the flood. And it's very interesting to know how Adam, he lived 930 years, and Noah's father, Lamech, was alive at the time of Adam. A couple of other interesting facts. Noah, he actually was alive at the time of Abraham. So these could have known one another, is what I'm saying. And let's go one step further. Shem, Noah's son, he was alive at the time of Jacob. Now let's go ahead and get started. Verse 1. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them. Now there's quite a bit of speculation on how many people were actually alive at the time of the flood. The multiplication of the race of Adam was probably comparatively slow, because of the great age to which each patriarch attained before his firstborn was brought into the world. Some would live 150 years before they would have their first child. Though as the name given is not necessarily that of the eldest, but of the son who enjoyed the birthright, it does not follow that in every case the one name was absolutely the eldest son. Also worthy of note is how verse 1 begins with, they began to multiply, man began to multiply upon the face of the earth, to wit, more than ordinarily, which is probably the reason why it's being pointed out, because naturally you would think that people were beginning to multiply, because they began to practice polygamy, men taking on more than one wife. And we'll see right here in the second verse how it even gets more gnarly than that, because they practiced polygamy after the example of their predecessor, the ungodly Lamech. Answers in Genesis commented how some people believe the population was relatively low. The Bible explains that people were extremely corrupt and violent prior to the flood. It is not hard to imagine the world being filled with wars, diseases, and other factors that would keep the population in check. So after over 1,600 years, there may have been a few million or so, but others believe that the Earth's population was much higher. If the growth rate in the pre-flood world was equal to the growth rate in 2000, there could have been about 750 million people at the time of the flood. But I have heard some very learned men claim that it could have been up into the billions. But now we come to verse 2, and this is the reason why I wanted to make a new version of this video, because now the sons of God. I used to take the Sethite theory, where before this chapter we're told about how the sons of Seth began to call upon the name of God. And so you say right there, well, there's sons of God. Well, you're right. But in the Old Testament, the only beings referred to as sons of God are the angels. And I'm certain that this is speaking of angels right here, fallen angels. So verse 1 is detailing how more and more people are populating the earth, along with many more women. Verse 2, now the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. David Guzik commented, the phrase sons of God clearly refers to angelic creatures when it is used the 3 other times in the Old Testament in Job. The translators of the Septuagint, written a couple hundred years before Christ, the translators of the Septuagint translated sons of God as angels. Those ancient translators clearly thought sons of God referred to angelic beings, not to people descended from Seth. Now, this naturally brings up a couple of different questions at the very least. One is what Jesus said, for in the resurrection, whenever the glorified bodies are given unto us, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. So right here, clearly being told about how angels do not marry, they're not given in marriage, but Jesus is not speaking of the fallen angels, he's speaking of those in heaven. Others may argue that the angels are not referred to as sons of God based on Hebrews 1. But those verses are being used to emphasize Christ's sovereignty over even the most powerful created beings. The entire first chapter of Hebrews is just about exalting Christ. But one must realize how there are different types of sons of God. We are called sons of God as well, but we are adopted into that status. Angels are referred to as sons of God, but were created into that status. Christ was never created or adopted. He is solely the Son of God by his own nature. All others are derived from him, as it does read in Genesis 1, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. That's the Father speaking to the Son, because Jesus, just as Paul wrote, is the image of the invisible God. And this is really the only logical solution to the other couple of references in the New Testament, namely that of 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 1:6. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Now there's a clear difference between these angels. Indeed, they're fallen, but they did something that cast them down to hell, and that is, of course, Tartarus, the lowest part of the pit of hell. We don't even want to know what that's like. But they did something obviously set apart from the other fallen angels, because the other angels are not being held in chains of darkness. By the way, that tells us that it's not chains that they're being held by, of course, but the darkness that they're in is like chains. They're actually being held by the darkness there. So really the only logical place out of all the Bible that can explain why these angels are already kept in chains of darkness, awaiting the day of judgment, the only logical explanation is these are those angels. And once again, we read how they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. To which, real quick, we can look right back on this chart and tell how people were living, 900 years, and Methuselah, he almost made it to 1,000. So I do believe that's one of the factors being pointed out right here, how God says, I'm not going to allow them to live so long anymore on the earth. It's not good for man to live so long. But I also believe, and I'm taking the popular view in this, about how the 120 years is denoting that God is going to give them from that time that he sees how wicked that they are. And I'm also assuming that that's the allotted time that these angels have. God is declaring your judgment is coming, but almost certainly 120 years is denoting the time period that they have to repent and to turn to him. Verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. This one verse has given so much rise to debate after debate. I think that it's pretty obvious, but I'm just going to state what I believe right off the bat. I think that everyone before the flood, due to the atmosphere in the air, there were dinosaurs, I believe, running around, huge animals. Right, here's a fossilized dragonfly with a 2-foot wingspan. They have now unearthed fossils of rhino, taller than a giraffe. Giant fish, lions, bison, you name it. And my whole point in mentioning this is how I believe that before the flood, everyone was taller, bigger, giants. And I believe that after the flood, just as the days of man were greatly shortened, I believe also the stature of man was shortened as well. So you may be saying, yes, Stephen, they got all these bones of these ancient giant animals and fish or whatever, but where's the giant bones of men? Shouldn't there be some? Well, right here are some articles. No doubt, probably some of them are hoaxes, but you can find articles where they speak of finding giant skeletons. Now, many disagree with me on that. That's perfectly fine. I could be wrong. But the way that I see it, there's two ways of reading this. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. That's one of the great proofs for my argument, if you ask me. What were their giants doing after that if all the people outside of Noah and his family died, unless Noah and his family were also giants? Just makes sense. But anyway, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. Now, once again, there's two different ways of viewing this. You can read it as, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. Meaning that the giants began to populate once that the sons of God, or the angels, began to populate with the daughters of men. Now, that's the popular view. Or you can take my view. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. I believe that the natural reading, without any preconceived notions behind it, render one to say that there were giants in the earth in those days. Now, that just means upon the earth, but that there were giants in the earth. Everyone was a giant. And that was also when the sons of God, when the angels came in unto the daughters of men. Now, you may be saying, well, why even mention the angels sleeping with the daughters of men then? Well, go to the second clause of this. It says, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, and they were all giants after that. That's not what the verse says. Giants are mentioned before the angels are mentioned. But also it tells about what happened when these angels slept with these women, these earthly women. They bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. That does not denote giants. The word translated giants here in the Hebrew is Nephilim, apparently a race of great physical strength and stature. Nothing is more probable than that at a time when men lived for centuries, human vigor should also show itself in producing not merely individuals, but a race of more than ordinary height. But now let's examine the Hebrew of this mighty man, Geborim. Mighty man has nothing to do with stature, but means heroes, warriors. The children of these mixed marriages were a race of brave fighting men who by their martial deeds won for themselves reputation. And once again, I'm not alone in my theory that Noah and all those before him were all giants. John Gill, I just read Charles Ellicott, but giants in the earth in those days, that is, in the days before the sons of God took the daughters of men for wives, there were giants. But we can disagree on those points. Either way, there were giants in the earth in those days, but why were these sons of God mixing with the daughters of men? Well, they found them beautiful, but was there another motive behind it? We read of the very first prophecy in the Bible in Genesis 3:15, and it's God speaking to Satan. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So right there, we're told about this seed of the woman. So obviously, Satan, he knew about this seed of the woman that was going to come along and be the death blow for him. So naturally, why not corrupt the gene pool? The Savior could not be born of a demon-possessed mother. So if Satan could succeed in infecting the entire race, the deliverer could not come. I personally believe that there was a meeting with these fallen spirits, and they said, look, the only way that we're really going to be able to win this is if we prevent this multiplying upon the earth so much. So we're going to need some volunteers to do something very drastic in order to save the rest of us. And I believe that a few of these fallen angels, they, knowing that the penalty would be very, very bad, because no doubt God sets these bounds and he lets them know the bounds are there. But I do believe that some probably stood up and said, we'll do it. So once again, there are giants in the earth. There's these angels mixing with women. There's just all kinds of chaos. Verse 5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Room shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. Now a cubit is about 18 inches long. It's from the elbow to the tip of the finger. But translated right here, it's 400 feet long, Noah's ark, 400 feet long, 45 feet high, and 75 feet wide. Verse 16, a window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above, and the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. Now from my understanding, the window, it would go all the way around the very top. Verse 17, and behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort, shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. Of fowls after their kind, and of cattle after their kind, of every creeping thing on the earth after his kind, 2 of every sort shall come unto thee to keep them alive. Now that tells us God directed them to come to Noah. He didn't have to go and round them up. And they probably weren't, full grown or anything. They were probably very young, and there's multiple reasons for that. And take thou unto thee all food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Thus did Noah, according to all that God commanded him, so did he. Now for some real quick closing comments. Although the work of building the ark, now listen to this, though the work of building the ark was laborious, costly, tedious, dangerous, and seemingly foolish and ridiculous, especially when all things continued in the same posture and safety for so many scores of years together, they just did whatever they wanted continually. Whereby Noah, without doubt, was all that while the song of the drunkards and the sport of the wits of that age, making fun of him. So that it is not strange that this is mentioned as a heroic act of faith in Noah in Hebrews 11:7, whereby he surmounted all these difficulties. It wasn't just building the ark. He had to deal with all the other variables. Now many today, thousands and thousands of years later, they scoff at the idea of putting 2 of every kind on the ark. But David Guzik commented, the ark carried 2 of every family of animals. There were around 700 pairs of animals. The average size of a land animal is smaller than a sheep. The ark could carry 136,560 sheep in half of its capacity, leaving plenty of room for people, food, water, and whatever other provisions were needed. Now it is worthy of note, because I don't plan on updating the next couple of chapters. Some commentators believe that many of those who died during the flood may have repented. I mean, whenever you see the floodwaters starting to come down, these huge 200-foot tidal waves flowing over everywhere, some of them's probably going to get right with the Lord. It'd be just sheer madness not to. But some of them probably repented. These could represent the tribulation saints, those who will be saved during the final 7 years, as it does say in the days of Noah. So who knows? Maybe some of them did repent. Maybe we'll be in heaven with some of those.